So everyone, thank you. We start the presentation. So Barinder, all yours. A few words from being the chairperson of PAC.
Thank you, Anil, and welcome everyone. This is our first CPD for this year, and it's a continuation from last year, as you all know. This is the third time that we are having Vanita here with us to talk about contract administration. And this is something which is so close to our hearts, right? Everything that we design, the whole design process that takes so long, once it comes to the construction stage, that's when we all get so excited about it. And how we manage that part is really what will give us the final outcome of the thing. So we are all very happy to be providing this CPD this time. And thank you also to our partners. We have MAA. This time we have Vanita with us, who's the new president of the MAA. And we have, of course, Anil with us, who is organizing all the CPDs for us. And we have a new registrar. I'm sure you all know there's Mr. Praveen Doma, who's our new registrar now. And thank you to all the panelists who are here and who are part of the team. And let's hope that we have a really educative and informative webinar today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Barinder. Thank you very much indeed for the keynote there. Quick word from Praveen, few words. Praveen, few words from yourself.
Yes, you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
Yes. Well, welcome everybody. Being the registrar of the Professional Architect Council, I have the pleasure to welcome you all to this first CPD webinar of this year. And I here would like to see the opportunity to thank Anil for organizing everything, and hope that all the participants will benefit from this webinar, and it will be a fruitful time for them to learn on this aspect of project management. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Praveen. We'll have Dharam and Raj quickly. Dharam, few words from yourself, please.
Everyone, I will be very, very quick because it's already 6:35, and good to see so many of you here. We haven't met since last year, so it's the first meeting. Welcome everybody, and let's look forward to the coming 1.5 to 2 hours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dharam. Raj, just quick word before we move on to Vinit, and I'll kick off the presentation. So Raj, few word, the importance of
hello everybody. Hello everybody. The topics chosen today are very interesting, and it will demonstrate that even with the best design, if we don't abide to procedures, we will lose in arbitration and at court.
Okay, thank you. Vinit, congratulations on being the new president of the Mauritius Association of Architects. Few words from yourself.
Thank you, Anil. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for this CPD event. My greetings to Mrs. Abadou, chairperson of the PAC, to Vanita Hooloomann, our guest speaker, and to our panelists and our dear participants. I welcome you all to the part 3 of the contract administration. I'm certain that we'll all enjoy this presentation. We had really nice feedbacks on the part 1 and part 2 last year. And finally, on behalf of the MA, I would like to once again thank the PAC for this collaboration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, everyone. You may switch off your video as I introduce everybody. So please, if you can switch off your video, thank you very much indeed. And can we have a big round of applause, everyone, for everybody on the screen to give back their time. So if you can just quickly put your quick emoji as well. And thank you. So let me just share the screen with you as we kick off the presentation. Just making sure I've got the slides sorted out on my side. And off we go. Here we go. Okay, so And Vanita, if I can have your screen on, please, as we will get you to introduce. Thank you. All right. Okay, so if you can see my screen, everyone, quick hands up there as well, just to make sure you guys can hear me. And Vanita, can you see my screen as well?
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so good evening, everyone. Thank you very much indeed. Today's webinar is on contract administration in the construction industry. Obviously, collaboration between PSC, MA, and industry guest speaker, once again, is Vanita Hooloomann. So thank you, Vanita, to give back on that one. Okay, so, and as you can see, we'll have Sooredoo, Nirupa, Rughoo, Kim, Currun, and also Hanna Boodhun being part of us. Today, last time we had Avinash Akia. He could not make it today. He's not too well. Okay. So just quick housekeeping. We've done the introduction. We'll have a quick survey and then part 2 of the presentation from last time and the Q&A and the survey as well. So again, once again, thank you for being here. Quick housekeeping, 98 of you registered for the talk today. And of course, thanks Tom for being here. It will be a 1 hour plus CPD. For a certificate attendance, please email me at anil@cpd-talk.com. I've just changed my email to cpd-talk. So just be mindful of the hyphen in between CPD and the talk. So thank you again, Vanita, Jay, Nirupa, Kim, Hanna, and the PSCMA team for giving back your time this evening. So I just want to just touch quickly before I introduce Vanita. That was a quote which I found out recently, or I found out, you know, back during a few years ago. And there was an article named "The Cost of Avoiding Dispute. Can we learn from earlier arrangement to reduce dispute later?" And that was from Peter Hibberd, who is the chairman of the JCT, which is the Joint Contract Tribunal. And he said, it is often said that dispute on a construction project are inevitable and lead to a waste of resources, which consequently increase costs. But what truth is there in this? It is not so much dispute that are inevitable as problem. It is how we manage problem that is the issue. Manage them badly and dispute inevitably arise. Manage them properly and the chances of a dispute diminish significantly, if not entirely. Something again, we'll touch on that later. Before Vanita kicked off, there was a recent survey which I picked up last year. And the main issues in dispute in the past 12 months are, as you can see right on top, is extension of time being one of the key aspect in terms of dispute, followed on by valuation of final account, valuation of variations, loss and expense, defective work, failure to comply with payment provision, withholding money coming on the 6-7 position, contractors design portion. These are all the key issues which have led to dispute. And as you can see, as you get along in terms of, even you've got architect instruction there at 10%. So this was a recent survey done, and these are the key issues. I just also wanted to share with you Andy Hewitt's book, which I'll touch on later. Andy is one of the leading thought leader of the FIDIC 1999. And what Andy says in his book is that, imagine that you have been invited to an interview for a new job. This job is a real step up to your career ladder and could enable you to move to a better house in a new area where your children would be able to attend a really good school. The job would be stimulating and interesting. And this is the chance that you have been waiting for you to prove yourself professionally. When the time comes for the interview, you would undoubtedly take care of your appearance, wear a good suit, and ensure that your shoes were polished. You would also probably have spent time thinking of how best to convince the interviewers that you're the ideal person for the job, and would have rehearsed answers to the question that you expect to be asked. So then, if you thought that there may be some negative aspect to your qualification or experience, lack of a specialized experience for part of the job, for example, you would probably have thought about how you could put a positive perspective to the interviewers, maybe by stressing some other aspect of your experience, which could be easily drawn upon to overcome those perceived disadvantage. In short, what Andy is saying, given the reward for success arising from the result of the interview, any person in this position would do their best to sell themselves to the people making the decision. So this is what he said in his beautiful book. Why then do many of those people or companies responsible for presenting or reviewing a claim which often equate to considerable sum of money, not take similar pain to ensure that their submission are presented in a professional and thorough manner, that they contain all the relevant and necessary information, and that they answer the question that they will probably be asked by the review of the claim. And I'm sure many of you can relate to that. When you've got a claim, immediately you probably reject it just by the look of it, or not enough information. Something we'll touch about with all the panelists and Vanita later. So I just want to share this quick video before we introduce Vanita. And why we're here today, because we love the industry. It's all about collaboration and managing all the paperwork rightfully. So let me just share that with you, and then we'll kick off. So here we go. I'm just making sure I've got sound shared as well on that one. And we go. There we go. Okay, so if you go, can you just give me put hands up, please, on the images. Thank you. Okay, so thank you for watching that. And as I introduce Vanita quickly now, as we move on, and we'll obviously give you a bit more detail on the panelists as well. So as you can see, Vanita Hooloomann is an executive director at RLB Hooloomann. She joined in 2013 and specializes in quantity surveying and cost management. Vanita has about 15 years of experience in project cost planning, financial monitoring, tender analysis, negotiation, contract administration, among others, and has provided services across multiple sectors in various countries, including Mauritius, UK, and the Middle East. Vanita is a member of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. She's also a member of the Association for Project Management and of the Professional Quantity Surveyors Council in Mauritius. She holds a master's in project management and a Bachelor of Science in Quantity Surveying from the University of Reading in the UK. Vanita, thank you very much indeed. Can we have all a big round of applause if you can use your little emoji for Vanita to take over. So Vanita, all yours. If you can share your screen, please, as we move on to part 3 from last time. And anybody, if you've missed part 1 and part 2, I'll share the link shortly on the chat box, and then we can take it from there. Vanita, take it away, and if you can have the full screen on your PowerPoint slide. And once again, thank you very much indeed for giving back, Vanita. Thank you.
Thank you, Anil, for the introduction. And I would like to welcome you all to this second part of the CPD that I started last year. Thank you to the MAA and PAC for having me once again. And we'll dive in straight away, I think, Anil, given that.
Yeah, so what I'll do, Vanita, just quickly as well, I'm just going to ask a quick question to the audience. I think you'll see the question there as well. How many of you enjoy contract administration? You can be totally honest. If you really enjoy the design side, or the contract admin side, and be good to put some context before Vanita start on that one. What's your thought on this, Vanita, in terms of percentage-wise? Have a guesstimate.
Yeah, let's say 60%.
Okay, all right. So let's see. We've got a few colleagues joining us, so we've got 20 seconds to go, and we will just share the result now. So you're almost there, and I'm just going to end the result now and share the result. So you'll see that 67% enjoy doing contract administration, but it's still a whopping 33% of you doesn't like to do that, but we'll make sure you enjoy contract admin at the end. And I've got one more question before we, this one, but I'll do this one when you finish extension of time claim. And I think, let me do that now. So this one is, how many of you had experience of dealing with an extension of time claim from a contractor? So it'd be good to know, many of you are registered architect or trainee architect and senior practitioners. So it'd be good to know how many of you have really dealt with some serious extension of time claim, again, which will put some context to Vanita presentation today. All right, so we've got a few more seconds to go. Most of you have voted 90%. So how many of you had experience of dealing with an extension of time claim? And I'm just gonna end poll there, and here we go. So I'm gonna share the result with you. 81% of you have dealt with an extension of time claim, and around 20% haven't. Vanita, take it away, and thank you very much indeed.
Okay, thank you, Anil. So as we mentioned before, I have done effectively last year the part 1 and part 2 of this CPD, which was an overview of the procurement routes and the FIDIC contracts, and also an overview of the tender documents and procedures. So today we're going to have a look at the more practical side of contract administration, and then I'll have a closing note at the end. So the part, this presentation will be in 2 parts. I will cover about 20 minutes and then leave some time for question and answers by the panelists. And then I will have the second part of the presentation for another 15 minutes before the closing questions and closing note. So let's have a look first at perhaps the execution of contracts. So I'm sure most of you have come across the contract documents. As you're fully aware, when we finish the tendering process, the next step for the appointment of the main contractor or any of the subcontractors or suppliers obviously requires some formalization of this tender offers that have come in after review and analysis, and needs to be converted into actual contract documents that need to be executed. So I'm just going to go through the principle of execution of contract documents. Whether it applies to construction or not, it's pretty much the same under contract law. So we've got 2 different ways of executing contracts: underhand, which are often referred to as simple contract, which means it's only signatures of company directors. This is generally used on smaller projects, smaller letter of awards, etc., where you do not necessarily require the contracts to be signed as a deed. On bigger projects, for example, if you're using the FIDIC Red Book 1999, those contracts are often executed as a deed, which means they have to be signed by the 2 parties or more. Witness, company seal needs to be attested, and these are executed as a deed according to the prevailing legislation. Why did I make the distinction between contracts executed underhand and under seal is because of the liability period that falls under each form of execution by law. The liability for contracts underhand, as you would imagine, is shorter. It's about 6 years, whereas that undertaken under seal or as a deed is generally in the region of 12 years. Obviously, it depends on where the contracts are executed. They are always governed by the local laws of the country. For example, in Mauritius, we have the Code Civil, which also applies to construction projects over and above what's stipulated in the contract documents when you place them. The agreement page needs to be executed. That's where the execution of the contract takes place. Generally, for the contract to be valid, the other pages that form part of the contract documents also need to be initialed and stamped. These include, for example, drawings and specifications. So I think for the architects here present, perhaps it's a good point to make that even the drawings, whether it's from architects, engineers, or other designers, and specifications that you provide us in the tender documents, they form part of the contract that is executed between a client and the main contractor or the other subcontractors. So you still have an important part to play in that process. If there are any changes that happen from the tender documents, it is possible to make that where the changes can be made and they are initial, so it means they are acknowledged by both parties. I'm going to have a look at the FIDIC Red Book, the contract clauses generally. So I've touched base as how the contracts are executed as a principle. Now I would like to have a look at the main clauses of the FIDIC contract, just to give you an overview. Apologize for the euro sign. I couldn't find anything with Mauritian rupee on, but I think the principle is the same in whatever currency you execute your contract. So just a quick overview. I think this is quite a nice visual way of looking at the various contract clauses rather than me writing out the clauses in a table form or bullet points. So if we start with the clause number 3 is where it deals with the engineer. The engineer is the person who administers the contract under the FIDIC Red Book. So that's a very important point to make. Even if we are different players in the industry or on the project, the contract administration is the duty or the responsibility of the engineer as defined under the FIDIC. Clause 2 deals with the employer, so the responsibilities, the rights, the liabilities of the employer. On the other side, clause 4 deals with the contractor, so his obligations, rights, responsibilities, and liabilities. Then you've got the other clauses that deal with the various aspects of the contract or construction project. So clause 1 or general provisions, so this is where there is general definition of the different terms used in the contract. Clause 17 deals with risk and responsibility, and clause 18 with insurance. On the other side, clause 5 deals with design, 6 staff and labor, clause 7 plants and materials and work, clause 12 test and completion. As you see, I've put these different clauses on the quality side. These are clauses that have more of a bearing on the quality of the project as opposed to cost and time. And I've put the other clauses that relate to cost and time on the right-hand side of your screen. So clause 12 deals with measurement and evaluation, which is what us as quantity surveyors would look at, as well as clause 13, which are variations to the contract and adjustments of the contract, and clause 14, which is a contract price and payment. Then I move on to the other clauses, which are more to do with the administration of that contract by the engineer, which is the clause 15 deals with termination by the employer. Clause 16 deals with suspension and termination by the contractor. Clause 19 deals with force majeure, what would qualify as force majeure. Clause 20 is claims by the contractor. And on the bottom of your screen, as you can see, I've highlighted some of the clauses that have an impact on the time of the project. So clause 8 deals with commencement, delays, and suspension. Clause 9, tests on completion. Clause 10, employers taking over. And clause 11, the defects liability period. So as we all know, this triangle has been, I think, has lived through various centuries and ages. It's always the famous one, time, cost, quality. It's been amended now to include various other aspects to go on to the 4D, 5D dimension of construction projects. But at heart, it still remains the backbone of a contract. It's still divided, any contract, whether you deal with the FIDIC, JCT, or others. In this case, we're taking the FIDIC Red Book. All the clauses relate in some ways or another to these 3 elements: quality, cost, and time. And each party to the construction contract on the design team, they will obviously have an aspect of looking after these different elements. So on the architect side, it will be the design. On the QS side would be things to do with the contract price, clause 12, 13, 14. And on the project management side would obviously be the time-related aspects, which are clause 8, 9, 10, etc. So obviously, when you have problems, when these clauses are being used, the problems obviously would relate to delays, quality aspects, non-conformance work, or additional cost to a project. So let's have a look at some of the clauses that deal with what we call site handover program of work. So I'm doing it in a very chronological way. So I've started with, once you execute your contract, an understanding of the main contract that you've just executed. And now we'll go step by step into when the project starts. So obviously, as soon as the project starts, the first thing that is required is obviously a site handover. And from that also is a program of works, because each and every party to the contract needs to know how long this project is going to last for and what are the documents they're going to get in order to execute this project. So clause 1.8 and 1.9, and we're still here under the FIDIC Red Book. I want to just clarify that. We're still under the FIDIC Red Book 1999. So clause 1.8 and 1.9 deals with the supply of drawings and instructions. A set of construction drawings should be handed and specifications should be handed over to the contractor at the site handover. Project managers here, in the likes of Anil, will tell you this is the first aspect that you need to get right. If this is not, if this doesn't happen, obviously the contractor has a claim for an extension of time. So that is a very important starting point of any project. And this is where these are the clauses that prescribe or specify how these should be supplied and in which time frame. Second clause that needs to kick in is clause 2.1, right of access to the site. The employer should give the right of access and possession of the site to the contractor free of problems. So that's the second thing. Once you've given the supply, the drawings and contract drawings, instructions and specifications, the first thing that the contractor needs is to have access to the site, and he will go to the site, he will do his survey. If there are problems on the site, for example, if you've said to him, you're going to give him access to temporary power, water, and he doesn't have that, this is the first hurdle, and this is where you will get claims for having to bring power, water on site. I think it's a very general problem that we all face nowadays, and that's the clause that deals with that. Secondly is the clause 3.1, where the engineer administers the contract. The details of the engineer and his personnel, his powers of authority and duties are listed out. So under this clause, all the parties, the employer, the contractor, and the engineer are fully aware of what the communication lines are between the three parties and how the engineer is going to administer this contract. So architects, engineers, quantity surveyors cannot interfere in the contract. We're not there to give instructions. It's the engineer who gives the instruction. The role of the engineer can be performed by an architect, by a structural civil engineer, a project manager, or quantity surveyor, as the case may be. The next clause that we need to be aware of is clause 8.1, which deals with commencement of the works. So that would actually tell you when this contract will start, and it can be amended to a number of days from the issue of the letter of award. The LOA is the letter of award. Generally, it's very difficult to have the full contract document executed on day one of the construction works. By that, I mean day one that the contractor is on site. So what we do to bridge the gap is we issue a letter of award, and then the contract can be executed slightly later. But still, it would mention when the works are going to start. And from that commencement date, we'll obviously kick off the program to understand when the completion of that project should happen. What will fall through, or what will follow quite logically, would then be clause 8.3, which is submission of a detailed program of works to the engineer. So once the engineer is on board and that contract is in place, or that contract is being executed either for the LOA or the actual contract document, contractor is on site, the next thing is the engineer will start to ask for a detailed program, because he needs to start monitoring the start of the works, the progress of the works, and to make sure that he can track that this project is on track to be completed within the program that has been stipulated. Once you're in the project and you've had all this put in place, the next thing that will happen is instructions from the person who administers that contract. Clause 3.3 deals with instructions from the engineer. As I mentioned, it is the engineer who has the authority to issue instructions or issue modified drawings to the contractor at any time. Instructions can take various forms. It can be oral or written. Confirmation thereof can be submitted later. There are communication protocols on site that are established by the engineer for a project execution plan. And there are references that are made to different documents, different procedures that will follow. For example, SI is a site instruction. It will be where the architect, the engineer, or the design team will give site instructions. The project manager will then confirm that it is a site instruction and valid to be executed upon by the contractor. Request for information will be from the contractor. He would have, after analysis of the construction drawings and specifications, he will obviously have queries. This is where architects come into play. If the information is readable and in very good shape, the likelihood of having requests for information is reduced, and it leads to less disputes or less arguments at the end of the day. The request for information, obviously the engineer will take note of that. He will make sure he follows up with the design team or the client or the client's personnel in order for the contractor to get the required information that is missing for him to pursue the works in the manner or in the form that he sees fit. Project manager's instructions would be engineers. So the project manager would obviously have different aspects to look after. For example, if he has programming issues, there are the works which are being delayed, there are works which need to be accelerated, he's not happy with the progress, he would obviously issue some instructions which the engineer will issue as an instruction to catch up or make up for any delays as he can see from the monitoring of the construction program. I think this is a very overview, a bit of a snapshot of a construction contract, the administration of the main clauses. Now we'll go a little bit more into details of certain aspects of the contract itself in terms of contract administration, whether it's financial or other aspects. So I'm going to look a little bit now at the guarantees and the bonds. I think this is for information. This is very common to us quantity surveyors because we look after the costing side of things, but it may be interesting for architects to understand what are the kind of financial securities that are available under the contract. When we execute that contract document, a part of that document is not just the general conditions, the particular conditions as we touched on before. It is not only about construction drawings and specifications. There is a certain aspect of that contract which also are called guarantees and bonds. So there are various forms or annexes in that FIDIC Red Book that you can use in order to provide certain financial security to the clients. And these are widely used in most construction projects in Mauritius. These are the different options. So the parent company guarantee would be a protection provided by a parent company for default of a party. The annex that deals with that is under the FIDIC Red Book. A bond is a financial guarantee which is provided by a third party, for example, a bank, an insurance company, for default of the applicant, which would be the contractor in this case. Clause 4.2 in the FIDIC deals with performance security. There can be different examples. Here I've taken the example of a surety bond, just to give you an example of how it looks like. These forms are available in the FIDIC contract itself, and you can open it and have a look. The bank guarantees shall be in the amount, in the currencies and proportions as stated in the appendix to tender. If you remember in my first session, I did touch on the appendix to tender, and this is one aspect which is mentioned there. And it will remain in force until the end of the defects notification period or the completion of the rectification of defects, whichever is the latest. The cost of that bond or performance security is normally borne by the contractor, and this is an item which they normally price for in what we call their PNGs, preliminaries and general requirements. So guarantees and bonds is one of the aspects I mentioned in the first CPD, but we didn't go into very much detail to explain what it is. So now we're drilling down into the different parts. The other guarantees that you have is the advance payment bond, and that is specified in clause 14.2. Advance payment in generally has been by default, if you look at the FIDIC, it's about 10% of the contract sum or the contract price, less the day works, the prime cost sums and provisional sums. This is now a subject of debate because with the current economic situation, this 10% is falling away very rapidly. A lot of the contractors or suppliers, when you come to nominated contracts or different packages, such as MEP or packages where you have long lead items, this 10% is being increased to 20, 25, 30% in some cases because of the need to secure certain equipment or plant ahead of time in order to secure prices. So this is now very much a subject of debate between us quantity surveyors and the supply chain to try and maximize and find a compromise between what is achievable from a client's point of view cash flow and what is required by the supply chain also in order to be able to confirm their orders. This example is under Annex E in the FIDIC Red Book or contract or FIDIC 1999. It's the cost of procuring that advance payment bond is by the contractor. So these are provided by banks generally or insurance companies as was mentioned. So the client will make an advance payment or a loan as it were to the contractor ahead of time before progress of any work in order for him to be able to secure predominantly materials and equipment or plant. Sorry, I missed one point. The advance payment is normally repaid through deductions in the progress payment certificates. The amount of each deduction is calculated proportionately, and this is the duty of the quantity surveyors or the cost managers to do that, but this is generally how it works. Of course, we've dealt with so far predominantly with the FIDIC Red Book, which would be the appointment of the main contractor or principal contractor, as we call it, for the main construction works or the main contract works. Under the traditional procurement, as you're fully aware, we touched on procurement routes last time in the first CPD. If we take a traditional procurement route, there are subcontractors or suppliers that are appointed, and these are done through a nomination process. So clause 5 under the Red Book describes a little bit what a nomination is, what are the definitions under 5.1 of a nominated subcontractor as opposed to a domestic subcontractor. So a domestic subcontractor would be somebody, a subcontractor who is appointed by the main contractor, it's his choice, whereas a nominated subcontractor, in a sense, is a subcontractor that the client would like to propose to the main contractor to take on board in order to execute a certain package. An example I can give would be, for example, MEP or mechanical electrical services. The client may ask the main contractor to take a particular subcontractor as his preference, and then the main contractor will take on that subcontractor, coordinate his works, etc. It is common for other packages. It could be for aluminium openings, screens, and the likes. Clause 5.2 deals with objection to nomination. So if there is any objection from the main contractor as to why he doesn't want to take this particular nominated subcontractor, the grounds, the reasons, the ways of putting forward that objection are clearly laid out in that clause. 5.3 deals with payments to nominated subcontractors because all the payments under the main contract, even for these subcontractors, generally goes through the main contractor, and he has a responsibility to pay the nominated subcontractors in the same way he pays the domestic ones. Clause 5.4 deals with evidence of payment in the adverse occasion or in the circumstance that there may be concerns that the main contractor is not paying the nominated subcontractors. There is a clause that deals with how evidence of payments can be requested, and that the client can take a decision whether to effect these payments directly to the nominated subcontractors. These procedures are again clearly laid out there. Determination and assignment of subcontract. In the unfortunate event that we may need to terminate, so the subcontract for whatever reason, financial performance, financial instability, financial bankruptcy, or lack of performance, and how to assign that subcontract to somebody else who has already started. So it may be that a subcontractor starts on a particular package, doesn't perform, and we need to obviously terminate his contract and appoint somebody else. Clause 5.5 deals with those two aspects. Interim valuation and payments. So that is particularly, I haven't gone into too much detail. I'll explain a little bit because obviously this is the roles and duties of a quantity surveyor, not so much of an architect, but such as just we are aware of the audience that is here today. Clause 14 deals with the contract price and payment, and clause 14.1 deals with the contract price itself, how the contract price is arrived at, in what currency, etc. it is in. Clause 14.2 deals with advance payment, like I explained before. 14.3 is about interim payment certificates. These are the progress payments that are made to the main contractor. 14.4 deals with schedule of payment, and 14.7 and 8 with any delayed payment. So this is generally the responsibility of a cost manager or a quantity surveyor, and obviously it is taken over by the engineer, who will issue the interim payment certificate and will obviously deal with the different requirements of these clauses in terms of documentation, etc. The next aspect of the contract price is, I think most of you have encountered a situation where the contract price is varied. By that I mean it can be increased or decreased. Most generally it increases, and this because there are variations to the contract. The price needs, or the contract itself needs to be adjusted accordingly. So clause 13 deals with that. So clause 13.1, there are engineer instructions for variation, how these can be instructed, and they will obviously, any variation has two aspects to it. It either affects the contract price or the contract completion date, or thirdly, both. 13.2 deals with value engineering. Very often you'll hear clients saying, if the project is running above budget, there is a need to save on costs. There is a need to find value engineering options to reduce the contract price. And this is where clause 13.2 deals with how value engineering can be brought about. The procedure for variation itself is laid out in 13.3. Changes in rates of the contract price is dealt with 13.8. Again, 13.8 and 13.3 are mostly things that the quantity surveyors deal with, as well as in collaboration with the engineer on the contract. Anil, I don't know, you had your hand up if you wanted to ask something before. I'm almost finished, and then we'll
No, sorry. I'm just, yeah, I was just trying to, yeah, that's fine, perfect.
All right, so these are the last couple of slides, then where we'll finish with the aspects of payment, valuation cost aspects of the contract before we have the Q&A, and then we move on to different aspects of the FIDIC itself on the contract administration. Interim payment and valuation is a very important part of contract administration. I'm sure no one is in the business of doing construction work if they don't get paid for what they have executed. So that's why it's quite crucial that this is properly administered and the progress itself is properly done. Under the construction contract, under the FIDIC Red Book, there is a provision for monthly valuations, which means there is a provision for progress payments. So any main contractors, subcontractors, or suppliers are guaranteed to have payment on a monthly basis based on the value of the work that they are executing, or the percentage stated in the appendix for any plants or materials delivered to the site. So that is the incentive really for the contractor to progress works. It's to get paid for what is being executed fairly on site. There is a provision for deduction of non-conformance work, and this is where architects or engineers or the design team comes into play. We have all come across projects where works are being executed, but sometimes inadvertently, there are some aspects of work which may not be up to the quality standards or according to the specifications or quality standards required from the architects. And this is where the architects can obviously issue architects' instructions to advise the quantity surveyors or the project managers or the engineers that there are certain works that need to be, they are abortive works, perhaps they need to be redone, they need to be broken out and then re-executed. And these deductions can obviously be made in the payment certification on a monthly basis. The most important point here is the fair valuation of works done. This is where quantity surveyor's job comes into play, is you have two parties to that contract. You have the client, the employer, and you have the contractor. Obviously, your job is to make sure that there is a fair evaluation of works done. So there is no hearsay here and there. The employer says, no, this has been done. The contractor says, no, it hasn't been done, and the like. So this is where this independent party comes in to fairly value what is executed on site based on their knowledge. Materials off-site, there is a possibility to also pay for certain materials off-site if you wanted to, that can be brought in. Sometimes there are very strict conditions laid out because the FIDIC makes provision generally for valuation of works on site, but in the normal course of business, it is not uncommon to have materials sitting off site in warehouses being delivered from port, and these can be certified if required, if approved by the employer, against a proof of lending, insurance of the works, and a waiver of hypothec. Advance payment reimbursement, as we mentioned, an advance payment is generally made on different packages, and these need obviously to be reimbursed on the monthly valuations on a monthly basis, so that at the end of the day, the final payment obviously tallies with the contract amount that has been put forward for that contract. Assessment of preliminaries is done on a monthly basis because you obviously preliminaries has two components to it: the fixed side of things, which are paid up front, and at the end, which is mobilization, demobilization of containers, bringing in services on site, etc. Variations along the courses of the project, there's always variations on every project has variations. So it's assessment of those variations that maybe need to be paid on a monthly valuation, day works that can be done on an ad hoc basis. And also we have the time for payment. Under the FIDIC Red Book, 1999, the time for payment is 56 days. But if you look at the short form, which is the Green Book, we touched on the different FIDIC contract types in the first CPD. The payment time is 28 days, so all that needs to be taken into account. Retention provisions, I'm sure you've all come across retention. So we have retention on construction contracts, which is an incentive. So it's about 5 to 10%. It's an incentive, it's a bit of money that is kept back on each valuation on each package. This is to make sure that if there is any defective work that appears during the course of the project, there is an incentive for the contractors or the suppliers or subcontractors to come and remedy that because it's part of money that is being held back until they do so. Final account is the final evaluation of the works, which is undertaken by the quantity surveyors generally, and the engineer will obviously discharge the final account to say that the contract has been executed fully and it is time that the final amount or final contract sum is valid, it has been arrived at and is agreed by both parties to the contract, i.e. the employer, the client, and on the other side, the contractor. So just so you have a bit of a visual aspect of how the payment and variation aspect of works operates under the FIDIC Red Book. This is a direct copy and paste from the FIDIC Red Book itself. So it's quite implicit in terms of the timeline, which clauses would kick in. So 14.3 starts with the contractor submitting his statement or application for payment to the engineer, 28 days under the Green Book, 56 under the Red Book. The engineer issues interim payment certificates. The employer makes the payment to the contractor. The final payment, again, there are certain timelines here again, which come into play. Contractor submits his draft final statement. 28 days, the contractor submits the final statement and the discharge. Engineer issues final payment certificate. Employer makes final payment. Okay, I think I will break now, Anil, for some Q&A for the panel to have a chance to discuss a bit more about that. And then I have a few more slides on different aspects for another 15, 20 minutes or so. I can't hear you, Anil, you're on mute.
Thank you, Vanita. If you can just stop sharing, we'll just get the panelists to join us. So if I can ask the panelists, please, to join us quickly as we get along. So if we can have Nirupa and Mr. J, Dharam, and also Hanna quickly. So thank you very much indeed, everyone. I'm just gonna, just starting with Jay. Jay, just quickly, what did you what did kind of struck you in Vanita's part one presentation? Was there anything in particular that bring memories to you?
Yeah, I think as a representative of the client, we all want to strive to keep the project, as she rightly said, time, cost, and quality. And so I think what struck me, or what I pick up from that, is we have to do our best to create the environment where the claims, any claims from the contractor can be reduced to a strict minimum. And we as architects, we've got a great part to play in that, especially in terms of delays, submitting drawings or details, things like that, you know. And so I think that's important for the audience of architects to understand how it is important for us as architects to watch on that, so that we don't become the cause of delays on site.
Exactly. Thank you, Jay. Hanna, just quickly on what Vanita has talked about regarding the execution of contract and things. Why, when we execute a contract, we've got a contract document, you've worked for GCC before, now you're working for Real Hanna as a commercial manager. Why does it take so much time to execute the contract? You know, we normally put like for 2 weeks, it ended up becoming 6 months. I mean, could you just maybe a few hints and tips there?
You know, Anil, for most contractors, once you get that LOA, you already have your tender documents that you had received, that you had qualified. So you already have a kind of, you know where your risks are, what has been agreed. It does take time for the contract documents to get to the contractor's office, because you have to compile everything. It's the contract documents that's going to stay as representing everything that has been discussed, everything that has been agreed. So it does take time to come to the office. And then as well, when the main contractor or the subcontractor, when they get their copy of the contract documents, they have to go through everything, because as Vanita said, every page has to be initialed, every page has to be looked at. And if you put your initial there, it means that you've read through, you've agreed to the terms. So if it does take time for the contract to be executed, it's because it's the Bible on the project. So before you put your signature there, you have to vet the documents very thoroughly, especially in the economic times that we're in right now. We have to make sure that on a tout balisé and that everything has been integrated in the contract documents.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Hanna. Just quickly, Nirupa, again, touching on part one of Vanita presentation. Vanita touched on the site handover regarding sets of construction drawing being issued. Why so many times we start the site and then the contractor is chasing for construction drawing? I mean, based on your 25 years of experience, why now, halfway through the project, we're still designing and we're still producing construction drawing when before we had more time? What's changed there?
That's not really my experience. I don't know how it is on your side, but usually we hand over a full set of construction drawings at the start of the works, and obviously sometimes due to site conditions, there might be some changes, and that's where the variations come in. But usually, my experience is that like 95% or 99% of the construction drawing are there at site handing over.
Okay, just quick one. Dharam, there's a question from Mathieu. Why do we use a lot of FIDIC in Mauritius? Obviously, I think you probably know FIDIC when it was introduced, but based on your 35 years of experience, why do we use FIDIC 99 still when we are in FIDIC, when we are in 2022? So maybe a few words from, are we comfortable with FIDIC as contractor and architect and design team? What's your thought on that one?
I think, most of us are quite, well-versed, if you want, with FIDIC. It applies both to architects, engineers, and quantity surveyors, project managers. And it has been the thing. It's not that we don't know the other contracts, but the others, to be very honest, East African Institute of Architects conditions of contract I have never used in Mauritius in 36 years. Never.
Wow.
And the government conditions of contract, up to 2008, that has been used. It was very simple, straightforward. And JCT never used. So most people in the construction industry, I'm talking about Mauritius, they are quite familiar with this. And
so familiar is the key word. We are used to it as contractors and design team. That's why we use it most often.
I presume that's the reason, because nobody's attempted or even tried over the last many years to change the thing to East African or JCT.
Okay.
This is my reading.
Thanks, Dharam. Kim, can you add this on, please? Kim, why do we use FIDIC so much? And then we can move on to the next one. I can see Nirupa raising her hand there. But Kim, maybe touch on the FIDIC. Why do we use FIDIC so much?
FIDIC is, any conditions of contract is a question of sharing of risk between the employer and the contractor. So the use of FIDIC has not proved, but maybe employers and contractors are comfortable with a sharing of risk associated with contracts. And this is why both contractors and employers, they are comfortable in using FIDIC conditions of contract. The risk element and the risk of transfer during the contract is well shared. This is one of the reasons probably that FIDIC is one of the most popular conditions of contract.
Okay, thank you. Nirupa, do you want to say something on this?
Yeah, I don't really know how FIDIC came to be the most used contract conditions in Mauritius, because I remember far back, I have been using JCT on normal projects, JCT on turnkey projects. Personally, I find that FIDIC conditions of contract are more geared for civil works. I have used FIDIC conditions of contract for many building works, and at sometimes I find myself like something is lacking, or there are some clauses that are not really adapted to building projects. I mean, I don't know, we don't have time here to look at these clauses and to see which is appropriate or not, but I think there could be some more discussion on this issue and try to find out maybe a more appropriate, because really at some moment, I try to find a clause which is more appropriate for building works in the FIDIC contract, and it's like I'm blocked somewhere. So maybe that's my personal opinion. But yeah, obviously we use FIDIC for most of big contracts.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'll just touch on Vanita quickly there before we kind of move on from FIDIC contract. Vanita, we've got FIDIC 2019, I believe, or 2017. Do you think, as a forward-thinking professional QS, what's your thought on this? Are we going to adopt FIDIC 2017 eventually, or are we comfortable with FIDIC 1999?
Very good question, Anil. Very pertinent question. We are already moving to 2017 as in the next coming months, probably as early as next month.
Wow.
Because when the FIDIC issues a new contract, obviously there are changes that have been brought in for the better good of the industry. So it would not be right for us to sit on the 1999 because of familiarity. So we are as a company ourselves looking to move to 17 quite quickly. There's a lot of work that has been done because it is quite different from the 1999. As you can imagine, the gap in terms of years is quite significant. So there are quite new layouts and new changes. So that might be a CPD topic for another time when I've mastered it myself. There's a lot of work to be done on that and research. But I think we have to move. We cannot stay back in the past. We have to move forward. We are doing it, and I think others will follow suit. And at the same time, even the subcontracts of 2011 will get updated, and they will have to follow also. But I think just to take back on some of the points of the question as why we use FIDIC. FIDIC is a very international contract. It's one of the contracts that has been rolled out and used in different parts of the world compared to the likes of JCT, which is very common in the UK, in certain European countries, but not necessarily outside. In the same way, East African contract is very common in Africa, but hasn't really made a mark in different jurisdictions. I think like the point that Kim made about the balance of risk is probably because maybe FIDIC is seen as a bit of more of a balanced contract for both parties, which is why it's so, it's perhaps the preferred option. There's just a few questions, Anil, I'll go very quickly, which I saw on the chat or the Q&A. I'm just going to answer them very quickly because I don't have time to type them necessarily. Engineer, can any firm be an engineer? Yes, of course. It can be a QS, it can be a PM, it can be an architect, it can be a civil engineer, it can be a structural engineer. The role of the engineer is the person who can administer the contract. So as long as these parties they have knowledge and skill to administer the contract, there is no requirement for the engineer under the contract to be a specific person. It is more commonly taken upon nowadays by a project manager because he's seen to be, or a QS or an architect because they are seen to be having more of a knowledge of how to do those, but it's very open. Guarantees, and if a contractor goes into liquidation, as I said, the first fallback is on the performance security, performance guarantee, which we touched about. If there is non-conformance work, I've already explained in the monthly valuation, deductions can be made for that. Oh gosh, sorry, my son is walking at the back. I did close the door.
Don't worry, Vanita, let me just pick that off. Don't worry, things happen. Just quickly, Hanna, I just wanted to touch on your side. And I want to just, because you've got a lot of experience from the contracting side. I think your whole career has based on contracting side. When you issue a letter of claim or notification or an extension of time, why do we get upset, right? Why do we consultants get upset when you issue that letter of notification, right? Few words on that, maybe based on your experience, and I'll pick up on Mr. J. comments there. Immediately when something comes up, you say, you'll probably call the consultant and say, I'm sending you a letter, and the letter comes in within the minute, right?
Yeah, I think
What's your
we
thoughts?
touched on that last time, Anil. But indeed, I mean, we in the last 2 months, I've sent out maybe a couple of notification. And I don't know, people take it badly, they take it personally. So I don't know, but for
Why?
us
But
as
why?
main
But why? But why do they take it personally? Why?
I'm not too sure why, because you know, for us as main contractors or subcontractors, we call it to issue a 20.1. Generally, that's what we would say, because that's the procedure for sending out a notification for a claim. So when we use it, it's only a means to open a door. We might not use the door, but we have to, because we would be time barred otherwise if we don't initiate that process. So for us, it's just using a provision of the contract as a main contractor or subcontractor. But the person at the receiving end of it, be it the client representative or the main contractor's representative, they take it as something very personal, and they don't appreciate it, you know.
Okay.
But I
Yeah.
think instead
Can I add just one quickly on this, Anil?
Okay.
I don't think in our case it's
so Kim, you're a consultant engineering firm, right? So just for everybody to obviously watching, so you're the consultant side of things. Maybe your take on that quickly.
Yeah, no, I think personally, I don't. I encourage contractors to take note of the provisions of the contract and the mechanism established in the contract to put their claims. There are no problems, because in fact, in putting their claims, I encourage them. In fact, recently I asked a contractor to put a claim for weather conditions, because if he doesn't put the claim, if he doesn't put a notice, he will never be able to claim. This is their right, on their own right, contractor. This is a contract signed between the contractor and the employer, and the contractor has got its right, and the employer has got its right. And if the contractor is taking care of its own rights, I can't deny that. It is in fact in their own rights that they can do it. I'm not aware that there are consultants personally who have met, probably not Vanita as well. We work together a lot. And I'm not afraid, and I'm not scared whether contractors put on claims. The consultant has to do their job in assessing properly the claim based on the established procedures and mechanisms set in the contract.
Okay. Mr. J, just quickly then, what's your thought on that? Because you work on major project in Mauritius, like everybody else here. You've written a lot of reply to the contractor. What's your thought on this? And again, everybody watching us, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll come back to your initial question, Anil. Why do we get upset? Well, initially at the beginning of my career, I used to get upset.
Well, you don't, okay.
But over time, I've understood that the main thing in dealing with claim is records. For the contractor as well as the consultant, records is a very important aspect of adjudication of claims. So further on in my career, I just take the claim as Kim was saying. It's right, and I've got to assess it. Obviously, it takes time to assess a claim, especially when all the submissions are being given. It does take time. But as far as possible, I've dealt with a major project in Port Louis where we've had notifications for extension of time, but then after discussion with the contractor, as you rightly said, one of you said rightly, that these notifications might not be used afterwards. So it's the climate which you try to bring on site, which will determine whether a claim will go ahead or a notification will go ahead. You will get a submission of claim, or you can deal with it in a different way, where you can find a sort of, I use the term a win-win situation or something like that, just to avoid going into the hassles of dealing with a claim with a lot of evidence and papers. But I think Kim is right in saying that's the right of the contractor. We've got to deal with the contract. That's a provision. And it's only, we have to deal with it. That's it.
Okay, Nirupa, you want to say something before I move to Vanita on a quick questions? Nirupa, just quickly, you wanted to talk about something.
Yeah, just wanted to say what Jay said actually, that with experience, we learn to take things less personally, and we know that it's the right of the contractor to issue notices, just as it's the right of the engineer also to issue notices to the contractor when things go late or go out of control. So it's a question of, yeah, I agree with Jai. It's with experience, you learn to, like, you put the problem here and then you step back and with equanimity and, yeah, learn to take things less personally.
Vanita, what's your take on that? You're young. Are you upset when you get letters of contractors?
Well, I think anyone who gets a legal letter gets upset for a few seconds. I think that's normal. No one likes those letters. I think that's human nature. But I think, as rightly said by Nirupa and Jay, with experience, with time, you learn to step back and not to take things personally. It is a right, as Kim mentioned, and everyone has a right to exercise their rights under a contract. So I think we need to be a bit more, understand that we are all humans. We all react in a certain way on the spot and then act professionally thereafter.
Okay.
Yeah. Just one more thing to add on that is that probably at the beginning of your career, there's a lot of emotion that goes into that. But then after much experience, you leave the emotion aside. Just like when you respond to a mail, don't respond on the spot. You leave the mail 1 or 2 days, let the emotions calm down, then you respond.
Nice one. Hanna, Hanna, so how do you deal with this? Because you're the one that's sending us the letter and making us upset. So what are you going to say?
Well, I'll just say, you know that the letter will be taken personally because that's human nature, as Vanita said. But then you give a call. You always give a call first, and you just say, I have to. Management tells me I have to send it. But Anil, one thing I wanted to just highlight is under government contracts, it's not a 20.1, it's an early warning that we send. And here this is very important because for government contracts, if you go beyond the completion date, you will get delay damages that's going to be applied. It's not a negotiation thing that you will come at the end. The contractor and client may say, okay, I will waive off the delay damages. Under government contracts, even if it's 1,000 rupees, a delay damage might come. And so you need to protect yourself, both for the consultant and the contractors, that the letters for early warning and the extension of time claims are actually sent out and the determinations are given. Just wanted to point one out.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Vanita, there's a question. Why don't we use as much design and build contract in Mauritius?
Look, we do use it. It's not that we don't use it. It depends on the nature of the project and the capability of the supply chain to do design and build. I think you know as well as I do, design and build in Europe is very different to here because contractors are more geared up. They have the design ability in-house, whereas in Mauritius, not many of them have a design department or design ability within a contracting firm to be able to execute design and build in the way and shape it should be.
Okay, and one more question before I take two more questions before we move to part 2. Vanita, why do we have so many nominations in a contract? So like 50% of it is nomination and 50%. So the contractor eventually just build concrete and the rest is being nominated. Why is that culture difference from maybe from overseas?
I think it's to do with the procurement route. We are very much in a traditional model, traditional procurement route here, where we are trying to get the best value for the work. So by tendering, by having different packages which are nominated, means you're tendering it out to a bigger market. It means you are actually trying to achieve value. If you left all the packages to the main contractor, then you only have 5 contractors, for example, on a tender list routing. If you break down the packages, you're going to the specialists, the people who actually do it day in, day out, and you're able to better utilize your supply chain for better value for money for the client.
Excellent, thank you. If I ask Jay quickly, performance certificate, could you just explain to everybody watching, Jay, your take on what is a performance certificate and why is it an important certificate when you issue them? Can you unmute yourself as well, please? Thank you.
Yeah, I think the performance certificate, as its name indicates, it states that the project has been executed as per the contract in line with the documents, and that the contractor has performed his duty and can be released from certain obligations under the contract.
And Dharam, can you touch on the performance certificate as well? From your take, why is it important? And when exactly do you issue it?
When it comes to that, actually, this certificate, or call it a recommendation, is certificate, whatever you want. Upon completion, you're going to issue that. But over the years, especially in the local context, I think it has been a thing that you require that certificate in order to, if you are on a whatever grade you are with the Construction Industry Development Board, or formerly the Ministry of Public Infrastructure, you want to move to a higher grade or something because you perform a satisfactorily contract, then that is a requirement. And then at the end of the contract, if you as the consultant, as the architect, you are satisfied with the performance, then it is but normal that you issue that satisfaction in terms of a paper, a certificate, or a recommendation, if you want.
Kim, do you want to say something?
Quickly, yeah, just quickly in terms of FIDIC, you will find there is one clause that we talk about the defects notification period, which is already established in the FIDIC as normally 365 days, unless there is someone met some of the particular conditions.
Okay. There's a question there from Sean Vanita. What is a waiver of hypothec? Is this similar to a vesting certificate?
Yes, it's a bit similar.
It's a bit similar.
It's the same principle. It's the same principle.
Thank you. Okay, so, and then there's one question from, for you, Vanita, again. Why are bond from insurance companies not generally accepted versus bond from the bank?
Yeah, again, this is a question of local context and jurisdiction where you operate. In Mauritius, it is felt that the banks have a better security to offer than an insurance company. If you're in a different market, an insurance company could be just as good. So it just depends on the financial institutions that you have currently and how much of an ability they have to undertake those commitments. And
before I get to Nirupa, Hanna, just quickly, we'll take two questions before we move to part two. Payment for material off-site. I'm sure you're dealing with these. How does that work? And who take out the insurance? Just unmute yourself, Hanna. Yeah. So just tell us a bit of the process of payment for material off-site and on-site as well. Off-site starting with.
So it's actually defined in the contract if material off-site or on the way to a site is going to be paid or not. So usually if you talk about material on-site, the material has been brought and then you get paid a value for it, 90% of its value or 80% of its value. The reason why we have this clause in the contract is because materials, especially for say M&E subcontractors, it has a lot of value. It has been bought. So the MEP contractor or the subcontractor or even the main contractor in terms of his cement, his rebars, his anything that he's going to use for the permanent works, it has been bought. So he has already spent the money. But if it is not part of the final structure, the permanent works, it would not be paid because we pay for work done. We get paid for work done on site. So in a way to make the cash flow easier for the main contractor or the subcontractor, this clause is actually kicks in to pay for material that has been brought to site. However, there is something that's very important if material is being paid on site is a cession of rights, where the main contractor or subcontractor, he signs this off to the client. So this actually becomes the property of the client, and then only would the client pay for these materials.
And Hanna, so what is a cession of right? What is a cession of right, and where do you get it from?
Well, the template would be available in the FIDIC format, or you can simply just write something saying that I, as a director who had the power of attorney to sign away, to cede my right over something. I'm ceding my right over this equipment that I bought over to the client. So now it actually becomes the property of the client. He has ownership of it. So then only would the client have, he would no longer have the risk that you walk away with his material after he's paid you for it. So then only would he disperse the money for that.
Okay, thank you.
So then if it's material, if it's material offsite, then it would probably be paid against payment guarantee, a bond, the insurance for it, and that you show clearly to the person doing the certification that it is earmarked actually for the project and it's not just a random material.
Okay, thank you. Nirupa, you want to say something there?
Yeah, that's on the performance certificate issue. I just wanted to add that just as when we take over, we issue a certificate to the contractor that the works have been practically complete and that the client can start using the building. After the defects notification period, actually 28 days after the defects notification period, when we have seen that also all the snags have been completed, all the as-made drawings and certificates of warranty have been submitted, and all the tests have been completed on the building, that's when we issue the performance certificate to say that the contract has been completed.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Vanita, there's a question for you before we move on to your presentation. There was a question earlier from an anonymous attendee. What are the financial security for any work that are not to the architect's satisfaction? And then he goes on to say about the financial security if a contractor goes bust. But the first one is if his architect is not happy, I guess they will have a chance to look at the interim valuation.
Yes, correct. There is a provision that you can, in the interim valuation, deduct non-conformance work. So that is deducted on the performance certificate, on the paper, sorry, on her performance so much, on the payment certificate on a monthly basis. As I said, if there is work which is not correct, you can deduct that value and it gets corrected and it gets paid properly. In terms of financial security, it's the performance bond or parent company guarantees like we touched on.
Yeah, perfect. Hanna, you want to say something there?
Yeah, and there's also the retention that is retained every month on the payment for to the main contractor and to the subcontractor. So if at the end of the day there is a defect that is not being remedied or works that need to be corrected, this can also be tapped off from that. Okay,
thank you, Dharam. Just quickly before I move on to Jay, I don't know if Kim's still hearing us. Dharam, just quickly, when there's an extra cost to the provision, there's an extra work, how do you deal with it as an engineer? I mean, obviously you've been as a lead architect, but if you give just a few words from if you've got an extra cost, an additional cost to the contract, how do you deal with it from an architect's point of view?
Of course, the first thing that, it depends on who's asked for this additional work, this variation. If it's the client, then he's fully aware that he wants something. It changed from the original design. It changed. Naturally will have an effect on cost. That goes without saying. So if it's the client, then should not be much of a problem. But if it's a change of design by the architect or the engineer, things like that, then naturally it has to be clearly explained to the client and what would be the effect on the design and in what way it's going to be better, that change. And naturally, a sensible, a reasonable client will be able to understand that should not be an issue.
Thank you. Kim, final bit from you before we move on. And then again, Nirupa's hands up there. Kim, why is it so important to make sure site instruction are issued in a timely manner and also backed up by an engineer's instruction?
In fact, there are several parties in the contract and basically on the consultant side, and instructions may be thrown by the architect, by the engineer, mechanical engineer, every party who is on the contract. And the project manager or the contract administrator, in this case, the engineer and the FIDIC, has to have a hands-on control on all these information. So normally, there is a contract administration procedures which have been set up earlier on, before even the contract starts, and everybody knows how to issue should know how to issue the contract. The engineer, the structural engineer, I mean, in this case, not the contract administrator, the M&E engineer or the architect has to go through the project manager or the contract administrator to give an instruction. It is only this instruction for the contract administrator or the engineer under FIDIC who is a valid instruction which could result in claim or to extension of time depending on the situations. So this is why it is important that all this issue of site instruction is well controlled if it doesn't concern, if it concerns material cost and extension of time on the contract.
Okay, thank you. Nirupa, you want to say something before we move on to part 2?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that we always have some contingencies on the contract. It's good to mention that, which cater for sometimes the site conditions, changes due to site conditions, but also due to design development, which may be required under contract. So we usually use the contingencies for that. Okay. When it's the client that requests for additional works and additional funds are required, so we usually ask the client to make provisions for the additional funds.
Okay, perfect. All right.
Just one thing on this issue of contingency. The contingency issue is becoming more and clients are more and more cautious on this story of contingency. And it is still the employer's money, and you can't use it whether you have been doing a wrong design or whatever. You have still to seek the client's advice or instructions to use the money.
Okay. Jay, do you want to just touch on this, on the contingency side of it? Do you see contingency being reduced gradually now in projects? Just unmute yourself.
Normally contingency is for unforeseen works, unforeseen situations. But as Nirupa pointed out, sometimes there are design developments, and it all goes down to how it's. And I think in these days, sometimes tenders are being launched. We don't have enough time to prepare really detailed drawings. And so there are some elements which are left for after. And so the design development occurs after the tender is launched for very specialized items. And that's where probably we would be tempted to use the contingencies.
And Vanita, quick advice on contingency. What's your thought on that? From a QSing point of view, do you allow for enough contingency on the project?
Look, I think most of it has been touched by the panel already. There are contingencies that we put forward for design development, for site conditions, as been mentioned, for employers' risk, etc. But these are normally mostly made in the stages of pre-contract when we are estimating the project, getting the budget together. When we come to a construction project on site, generally the contingencies that are left are called construction contingencies, which are for items that occur on site, like Jay mentioned, a bit more unforeseen. And like Kim mentioned, the main point is that it's still the client's money, and a lot of clients require approval before expenditure of contingency.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to part 2 quickly. Just quick, Hanna, please. I know you've raised your hand. Quickly before we move to part 2.
On top of contingencies, which as Jay said is for unforeseen circumstances, I think a lot of BOQs have provisional sums, you know, that for something that has not been designed at tender stage, to have a sum for it that is actually drawn from when you get the detailed design for it. And so that can be used as well.
Okay, perfect. So everyone, Vanita will take on part 2 of this webinar. We will complete in 35 minutes. So we've got enough time so we'll finish at 8:30. So please have your food, keep eating while you're watching us. All right, so Vanita, take away part 2, and thank you very much indeed.
Yes, so now we're going to move a little bit on a few more, some slides on the different aspects of the FIDIC contract, the contract administration. So I've done with the financial side already, so now I'll move on more on quality and program really, and the last steps of the construction contract. So extension of time and delay damages, we have talked about it already a little bit. What is an extension of time? I think the definition here is quite pertinent for those that maybe have heard the term, but don't necessarily understand what it means. An extension of time serves several purposes as far as contractors are concerned. But in general, it removes the liability for delay damages against the original completion date and sets a new completion date. The number of contract clauses that come into play when we talk about extension of time and delay damages. First of all, we have clause 3.1 and 3.2, which is the authority of the engineer. There are restrictions on the engineer, which are laid out in the particular conditions as to how they should operate extension of time and delay damages clauses. 3.3, in order to have an extension of time on the contract, it obviously needs an instruction from an engineer who will accept the extension of time and therefore set a new completion date. 4.1, the contractor's obligation to comply with that engineer's instruction, whether he's asked for 15 days extension of time and he eventually only got 10 days of extension of time, means he has to comply with his 10 days. He cannot keep his program to show 15 days extension of time. He has to accept the 10 days and obviously alter or amend his program to set the new completion date with the extension of time that has been approved. Clause 8.4, whether an extension of time gives rise, how does an extension of time come about in the FIDIC contract? It's due to a variation. An extension of time is a variation to a contract. To be read in conjunction with 13.1, vary the words, and 13.3, the variation procedure. What is a delay damage? A delay damages or delay damages are a genuine pre-estimate of a client's loss should the completion date be missed. I think the key points here, pertinent words, are genuine. A client cannot just put a delay damage which is unrealistic. It should be a genuine estimate of what loss a client will incur should a completion date be missed. For example, if we take an example of a retail unit where the client will potentially rent that to a tenant, let's take a food outlet or a restaurant, a delay damage would be the loss of rent if the project doesn't complete on time, which means the operator cannot operate, and therefore there is a risk to the client in terms of a loss of rent on that. Like I said, what is a genuine pre-estimate of loss and what constitutes delay damages? Examples would be a loss of rent or other income, additional fees, fines from his statutory bodies, costs which are imposed by third parties on the client, costs incurred by the client because of not having the building available. Maybe he has to rent other premises, maybe he has to store whatever he intended to bring into the building somewhere else, whether they're abortive costs or any other cost that justifiably the client will incur if they do not have the building on the agreed date. In the FIDIC, how do we deal with delay damages? It's usually a cost expressed per day up to a maximum of 10%. That's a default of the contract sum. That's a default percentage under the FIDIC. Damages cannot be construed as a penalty. This is not a punishment. It is not the idea of having delay damages in a contract is not to punish the contractor for finishing late. It's just a right that the employer, as one party to the contract, has to be compensated or rightfully compensated for delay on the project. That is usually something that is deducted directly by the client. It is not something that quantity surveyors will put on the evaluation because it doesn't have any bearing on the progress of the works. What do we mean by unliquidated damages? I think it's very important to know that the reason why we specify delay damages or liquidated damages in a contract is so that both parties, whether it's the employer or the contractor, are quite clear as to what their compensation or liability will be if the contract is delayed. If, for example, there was no mention of a delay damage per day or a maximum, then damages become what we call unliquidated, which means that there is no limit, there is no amount specified. Therefore, it is something that generally gets then pursued through the courts and are generally demonstrated for a client proving actual loss in a specific set of circumstances. So a client can say, I'm going to lose 1,000 rupees a day, but if he wants to go down the road of the court to justify whether that is justifiable or a genuine pre-estimate, he can do that. Otherwise, he can just put a more realistic figure, say, for example, 700 rupees a day in the contract. Then both parties are clear as to what their liabilities would be if the project is delayed. We'll finish off with dispute resolution and then obviously with some of the last documents or procedures that operate in the construction contract. So I'll let you do the poll, Anil.
Yeah, so I've just got a quick question, everyone. Which alternative dispute resolution route would you prefer to go for before Vanita enlighten us on that one? Be nice to get your thought on this one. Is it going to be arbitration? Is it going to be mediation or adjudication? Of course, Vanita will explain a little bit more about that, but which ADR route would you prefer to go for, if ever there's a fallout or you don't agree with a contractor from a design point of view or from any issues it could be. But ideally, we want to avoid the whole ADR because collaboration is key in the industry. But if you were to go, which route would you go for? I'll give you a few seconds before we conclude. What's your thought on this, Vanita? Where do you see people and in industry heading to if they were to choose one of these ADR there?
Look, I think arbitration's been around for a long time, and it's probably the most commonly known form of dispute resolution on the FIDIC from generations onwards. But it doesn't mean that it should be the default way. Obviously, you have steps before, like mediation and adjudication, which should be undertaken before you go down the arbitration route. But I think arbitration probably be the one that people mostly know about. Okay,
so I deliberately put mediation in the middle to see what our colleague goes on to say. And it's quite a nice result. 72% say mediation, 16% say arbitration, and 12%. So we've got a whopping 72% there, Vanita, on mediation, and I think what you've just touched on as well. Take it away, and thank you very much indeed.
Yes, thank you. Why we're touching on the subject of dispute resolution, ADR is alternative dispute resolution, why we have this, I think from a contractual point of view, I think any two parties that enter into a contract are fully aware that there may come a point during that contract where they do not agree with each other. And therefore, the reason of having a contract is to be able to deal with the dispute in a prescribed manner. Otherwise, we could have a contractor starting to do works without any contract, and then each parties are left to themselves to understand what happens in the case there is a disagreement. Then it's a long procedure of litigation, etc. So dispute resolution is a very important part of the construction contract. It does sound, as Anil said, we should all be collaborating. It does sound adverse to that, but the purpose of having it in the construction contract is so that both parties to the contract are fully aware what are their rights, what are their obligations, and what are their recourse if ever there is a dispute between them. And increasingly, dispute ADR is an umbrella term for all forms of dispute resolution except arbitration and litigation. Alternate dispute resolution technically is via arbitration and litigation. Alternatives means that there are other ways of dealing with disputes which are more cost efficient, which are more collaborative in nature, and which are more quicker, which is why we're going to look at what some of them could be.
Yeah.
Okay, so a body of dispute resolution techniques that avoids inflexibility of litigation and arbitration and focus on enabling the parties to achieve a better or similar result with a minimum of direct or indirect costs. That's the purpose of alternative dispute resolution method. Examples include mediation, which is what was quite popular on your poll today, Anil. Mediation, what is mediation? It involves a process where you have a neutral party or an independent party to the parties of the contract. So it cannot be a mediation, it needs a mediator, and it cannot be the employer or the contractor. It has to be an independent party who's not a party to the contract. He brings the parties to an open discussion, which he or she chairs and actively participates in, offering views on the cases brought forward. So what he's doing is he's hearing both sides of the argument, and he's going to make a judgment or a decision as to what he thinks is one way or solutions of settling the dispute. If no negotiated settlement results from the process, the mediator will make recommendations. So his duty is to try and get an agreement between the two parties outside the views of the court or arbitration. And if the parties agree, then that is the way forward. If the parties do not agree, he would obviously put forward certain recommendations for the parties to work upon. Adjudication, there is a clause under the FIDIC Red Book on FIDIC 1999 about the appointment of an adjudication board. It can be a sole member or a panel of 3 members. I think in the FIDIC contract, the adjudication is quite clearly laid out. So if you look at the dispute adjudication board under the FIDIC, that is an extract like for like from the FIDIC Red Book.
Yeah.
It tells you when you can commence adjudication. So there's 8.1 that deals with the commencement date, 28 days for the parties to appoint the dispute adjudication board, clause 20.4, a party refers the dispute to the dispute adjudication board. The parties present their submissions. They have just at a maximum of 84 days. Then 28 days later, the board needs to give its decision. The party issues a notice of dissatisfaction if they are not happy, and they can move on to try and settle the dispute amicably. If not, after 56 days, they may initiate arbitration, and the arbitrator or arbitrators are appointed. So this is a like for like what is the default position under the FIDIC on adjudication. Obviously, if there is no resolution for adjudication, adjudication is slightly less complex or slightly less formal than arbitration, although it is a bit more formal than mediation, because mediation is left to the parties to decide on timelines, on who to appoint as a mediator, how to settle the dispute. Adjudication is a bit of a process which is fine-tuned under the FIDIC. It has certain timelines that I explained. There are certain procedures you have to give notice. The other party has to receive the notice. There's representations being made, etc., in front of a board of adjudicators. Arbitration is very, very formal. This is a very private dispute resolution method. What's the difference with litigation is that arbitration is done privately in an arbitration court, whereas litigation would be in a normal court of law. So it is a private dispute resolution process, which, barring serious irregularities or error of law, is binding with generally no appeal to the courts. That's how it should operate. There's a choice of arbitration rules. The default under the FIDIC is the ICC International Chamber of Commerce in Paris. In Mauritius, we also have MARC, which is one of the local bodies or jurisdictions where you could refer a dispute for arbitration. This is the alternative dispute resolution arm of the Mauritius Chamber of Commerce and Industry. There are other arbitration seats. You have seats of arbitration in Dubai. You have arbitration seats in Singapore. So again, the choice of arbitration rules, the choice of where the arbitration should take place can vary depending on what you would require under the FIDIC contract, can be amended in the particular conditions. Amicable settlement, this is one important aspect which should not be overlooked. There is a clause 20.5 in the FIDIC that encourages the parties to settle the dispute through negotiation, conciliation, mediation, other forms of ADR, which is what amicable settlement is about. It would also be the engineer taking a decision on the dispute. So this is not to be overlooked. So the FIDIC itself does make provision for non-argumentative or less argumentative or less formal forms of dispute resolution. Just have a few cases here, just to give an example of what happens in some cases, just for information's sake. This is a case of Dunnett versus Railtrack in 2002, where for the first time in the UK, the courts penalize a party for refusing to consider mediation. So even the courts in construction contracts are gearing or trying to promote mediation or alternative forms of dispute resolution before the two parties take their dispute to arbitration or litigation. The case of Hertz versus Lemming in 2002, again, this case suggested that the party will not be penalized for refusing mediation in all cases. This decision contrasts with the above case. So again, it's very dependent. Sometimes the courts will say, okay, let's do mediation. Sometimes they will say, no, in this particular case, they do not really agree that this should be the route forward. So this is two sides of the argument. So what I've tried to show here is that different case laws have actually taken different views on whether alternative dispute resolution has a place in construction contracts or not. Obviously, it's down to the construction contract that you put in place to establish what the dispute resolution method will apply. You can have a choice. It doesn't mean you can choose only one. So you can have amicable settlement, you can have mediation, you can have adjudication and then arbitration, or you could say in your construction contract that you are going straight away to arbitration. You don't want alternative dispute resolution, or you can have a shorter process with, for example, mediation and arbitration. Moving on from dispute resolution now, we'll touch on the final aspects of contract administration. So on the final stages of a contract, what happens? Obviously, there's a taking over of the works. Clause 10 deals with taking over, how the works are when the works are completed. Clause 10.1 allows the employer to take over the works once completed, which means now the contractor has finished and the works become the property, or the employer will take responsibility of the works going forward, i.e. the building which is finished or the project which is finished. What do we mean by completion of the works? I think it's a very important aspect for architects to understand. What do completion of the works really mean? It doesn't mean just the building, when you look at it from the outside, is complete. There's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes. It means internal finishes should be complete, power available, lighting complete, all the M&E such as plumbing, drainage is complete. The premises needs to be able to be locked and secure so that when the main contractor walks away, that building can be handed over to the employer. All the services need to be tested and commissioned. Smoke detection should be complete if it's a requirement. If there is any shop fitting part of the contract, these also need to be complete. Telephone installations, Wi-Fi, etc., and the lights nowadays needs to be complete. The employer needs to be able to have continuous access to the area, which means that he needs to be able to walk through every part of the building and it's all complete. It's not just the first floor is complete and the rest is still under construction work. Any landscaping or external works also needs to be complete. Once all these aspects are completed, so when the building is properly finished inside and outside, the engineer will issue what is known as the taking over certificate within 28 days of receipt of the application by the contractor under clause 10. I think we've touched on the taking over certificate already. If he's unable to do so, the engineer will reject the application, giving reasons why, and specify which work is required to be what are the further works required to enable taking over to take place. If the engineer fails to issue the taking over certificate or the rejection, and the works are deemed to be substantially complete, then taking over happens on the last day within that 28 days period. So this is why it's very important to understand how the contract clauses work, because there are responsibilities on the engineer and on the contractor when it comes to taking over. There's also an option to take over parts of the works in sections, and clause 10.2 deals with sectional completion, which means that the building can be divided into different sections. You could have ground, first, second floor, third, fourth, and fifth and sixth floor, and the roof, or external works separately, which means that there are different timelines or completion dates associated with the various sections of the work. Beneficial occupation is very different to sectional completion. The FIDIC contract only mentions sectional completion. This is a contractual obligation. But sometimes what happens, it may be that the employer will tell you they do not want to have sectional completion, but perhaps they want they want direct contractors to be able to access the works in case, for example, there might be fitting out of space, whether it's an office, a supermarket, or a retail, where this fitting out works or shop fitting is not part of the main contract. It's the employer's responsibility to do, therefore it falls under direct contracts, and they just want beneficial occupation, which means they want the direct contractors to have access. What does taking over do is retention release. So when you have taken over of the works, half of the retention is released, or if there is a bond, the bond has to be returned. There is half of the retention that is kept, because this is the incentive for the contractor to remedy the defects during the defects notification period. Otherwise, there would be no incentive for the contractor to come back and rectify any defects post taking over, because very often, as much as we want to be meticulous, as much as we want to make sure the works are fully complete, it does happen that after completion there are defects that appear which were not apparent on the day of taking over, which the contractor still needs to rectify within the 1 year or the 365 days of defects notification period. One thing to note is that over and above what is specified in the construction contract, in Mauritius we also have the Code Civil, which means that there are warranties of workmanship which will apply under Code Civil, for example, 10 years on grey works, etc. So these are something that contractors need to be aware of, or the engineer needs to be aware of.
And Vanita, just quickly as well for the audience, the Code Civil itself, they are a big topic in themselves, right? They are not just one pages, they are loads of pages.
No, but just to be aware that the Code Civil does put requirements on buildings. There are, for example, as I said, what we call grey works or concrete works have liabilities for 10 years, even if your contract doesn't last 10 years, and M&E, etc., or shorter packages have different liabilities. So that is another CPD in itself.
Thank you.
Yeah. The defects, so once taking over happens, what generally kicks in after taking over is the defects liability period. As Tim mentioned before, the default under the FIDIC Red Book is 365 days, i.e. 1 year. But in the particular conditions, you have the option of specifying a longer period. There are sometimes statutory requirements. For example, here in Mauritius, on some of the smart cities, there are requirements for that to be extended to 2 years. And that is perfectly fine. It is possible as long as both parties agree. What happens in the defects liability period? It's the contractor is required to complete any snagging which may appear during that defects liability period. As I said, these are defects that appear after taking over date. Defects notification period is the period for notifying defects and or damage in the works or a section or part, as the case may be, under subclause 11.1, which is completion of outstanding works and remedying defects, as stated in the contract data. If not, it's normally 1 year. It may be extended, and the extension would take place under 11.3, which is the extension of defects notification period. This period is calculated from the date of completion of the work or section or part. Performance certificate, I think we touched upon before, but just to conclude the contract admin, I think it's one of the topics we need to deal with briefly. The engineer will issue the performance certificate under clause 11.9 when the contractor has fulfilled all of his obligations under the contract. What it means, it constitutes an acceptance of the works by the engineer. So that is how I think some of the points made by the panelists before, it's that it discharges the contractor of his responsibility or obligations under the contract, which means everything has been completed. The contractor has, after that, 56 days to submit his final statement with supporting documents under clause 14.11. The engineer will issue the performance certificate within 28 days after the latest of the expiry dates of the defects notification period, or as soon as the contractor has completed and tested all the works, including remedying of any defects. I think that's a little bit on the closing side of the contract administration side. And I will give the chance to the panelists to obviously take the questions and expand a bit more. But as I close this CPD on my side on the slides, I think contract management, I will summarize as follows. The engineer under the contract is the key in what is known as contract management or contract administration. The deliverables from the design and cost management teams need to be very clear because that is what constitutes disputes or claim or gives rise to claims under the contract when these deliverables haven't been met. And the two parties to the contract remain the employer and the contractor.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed on these powerful notes, Vanita. And if I can ask the panelists please to join us again for the talk as we start sharing. Just making sure I stop sharing and then get everybody in. Thank you very much indeed. We'll pick up the question quickly. There's been quite a few questions being asked from the panel. So I want to just clear the question being asked quickly in fairness to all the participants. Kim, there's a question for you there. Why do we allow engineers to project manage and administer architectural project in Mauritius?
I don't know whether we have architectural projects or not. I know we have projects and projects are for clients. The second thing is, it is not a question of engineer. It's a question of contract administrator and architects, quantity surveyors, and a lot of project managers having the competence, the knowledge, and who have studied the contracts, who has a very good experience in contract administration. It is not a question of profession, whether it is from an engineering background, architectural background, or quantity surveying background, but you have to demonstrate sufficient competence in managing contracts and have a good knowledge of contract law that a lot of QS studied and a lot of engineers do the studies. And nowadays we have masters in project management, masters in a lot of contract management. And there are those who are responsible. These persons are responsible for administration of contracts, not engineers, QS, or architects.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed for this clear clarification, Kim. Hanna, a question from an anonymous attendee. How does insurance cover a contractor for damages during the defects liability period? So do you have an insurance that cover you?
Yes. So generally, when you start a contract, it will be requested that you take out a CAR, a contractor's all risk. So it will cover the insured parties, which will be the client, the main contractor, and his subcontractors. And it will be defined if it's the main contractor who takes it out or if it's the employer who takes it out, depending if it's a renovation and the client already has the building there, or if it's a new project, it will be either the client or the main contractor. But the insured parties will remain the client, the main contractor, the subcontractors, the suppliers as well. Now, when you apply for the insurance, you will have the defined start and completion date, and then it will say plus maintenance period, which will be the defined defects notification period in the contract. So every time the project is extended, there is an extension of time. As the main contractor or the person who has taken out the insurance, you will need to apply to your broker or to your insurer and tell him that you need to extend my insurance. But that maintenance period that is in the contract, in the insurance policy documents, it's always going to cover you in terms of any damages that you may incur during the defects notification period.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Jay, there's a question for you. Would additional professional fees due because of an extension of time form part of the amount for delay damages? So would additional professional fees due to extension of time which form part of the delay damages? So what I understand, if there's an extension of time, you need to include your fees. How does that work?
Well, it all depends what is the cause of the extension of time. If it is additional work, additional part of the building or whatever, I think this has to be borne by the client who is requesting these additional works. If it is extension of time due to adverse weather conditions, that's a different story. And I think it all boils down to the nature of the reasons for the extension of time. And generally, in my experience, clients do not like the idea of additional fees, but it has to be explained to them. If it emanates from them, obviously they've got to pay for additional fees, but that depends on the reason.
Okay, thank you. Vanita, there's a question for you, and probably as well as Hanna as well, being one of the working for one of the specialist subcontractor. The FIDIC subcontract read that the delay damages should be capped at 10% of the contract value. However, many subcontractors qualify that same shall be capped at 10% of their subcontract value. What's your thought on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the debates between consulting PQSs and contractor PQS. So we've had this debate many, many times. And I think at some point, we have to take a fair judgment on what is this liability for. If you have a subcontract which is only 10 million and you're asking for damages beyond that, I wonder myself if it would be admissible if you went in a court of law to say whether it was fair or not. I think as much as we want contracts to be back-to-back between main contracts and subcontracts, there is a judgment call to be made on a case-to-case basis.
Okay, thank you.
You know, depending on the hat that I'm wearing, I could argue for both sides. You know, if when I was working for a main contractor, I would say that the risk is really big if you say that the limit of the damages for the subcontractor is 10% or 20% of his subcontract price, whereas any delay that he would cause for the main contractor ultimately would have to pay 10 or 20%, 10% of his own contract price. So as a main contractor, I would say this risk is too big. But as a subcontractor, obviously, it's even more than the subcontractor's contract price himself, his subcontract amount. So as Vanita says, you have to be reasonable and find common ground to be able to sign the contract.
Absolutely. Just quickly, Kim, there's a question for you from a project management side. What is the difference between a construction contract and a PEP? I take it that the person is saying a project execution plan. So what's the difference between a construction contract and a PEP? Few words.
These are two different things. PEP is a project execution plan. It's normally a plan that you will, when you already got the contract, and how you will go into execution of the contract. Whereas a construction contract defines what you have to do, the scope of works, and the duration, etc., and how you'll go into. Once you get the contract, then you go into the PEP.
Okay, perfect. And just quickly, Jay, in terms of FIDIC, Jean-François is asking, where can I get hold of the various FIDIC contract for consultant? I believe we have Devin Dahlia, who's the chairperson of CRP. He's one of the leading one. I can see Kim saying yes or no. It's a no.
In fact, the representative of FIDIC locally is Association of Consulting Engineers. And if you want to have a copy of the FIDIC, it is available through Boodhun-Ramjaun.
Okay, Boodhun-Ramjaun. Mr. J, do you know anybody? I know Devan doing
I got
good.
mine. I got mine through CIDB because CIDB did a workshop,
exactly.
So I bought it over there.
Okay, so CIDB, Boodhun-Ramjaun, and I've been speaking to Devan Dalia, who's the director of is it Profile? Yeah. So Profile.
Yes, but yeah, Devan will get it through ACE because he's a member of ACE.
Okay, perfect.
Otherwise, when you go to seminars provided by FIDIC, then you can buy, as Jay has just has bought one. Yeah.
Okay,
but
perfect.
if you want one off shelf, you can go through the AC.
Okay, perfect. So Jean-François, if you need the number, please WhatsApp me. We'll give you all the details of the colleagues. And just quickly, Vanita, what is the I mean, you've talked about it. What is the difference between taking over and beneficial occupation? Few words on that.
Okay, taking over is a contractual requirement. It's under the FIDIC, the words have to be taken over. A contract cannot be for an indefinite period of time. So like everything in life, it's temporary, it has to start and finish. So taking over is a requirement under the contract for the works to finish. Beneficial occupation is not a contractual requirement. It's an agreement that is made between the two parties to be able to benefit from occupying the works. It is not prescribed in the contract. It's something that can be brought in for the benefit of both parties.
Okay, thank you. Anybody?
Maybe I could just at the same time ask a question and at the same time bring some experience into that. Sometimes the client is pressed by time to enter the building, even when the building is not finished. So it takes over beneficial occupation, but that equals to taking over in some way. Am I right, Vanita?
Yes, there's always been a debate about beneficial occupation, as you rightly say, and as I mentioned before. Sometimes what happens, there are fit-out works which have to happen for the building to be operational, and the client wants other contractors to come in and perform certain parts of work, which is not the scope of the main contractor. And many main contractors will argue that under the contract, once the client has taken over, that as beneficial occupation is deemed to be taking over. But I think in the FIDIC, it is quite clear what taking over means, what documents need to be issued, and for taking over to happen, that taking over certificate needs to be issued whether beneficial occupation has happened or not.
Yeah, if I can just add one thing on what Vanita said, is that beneficial occupation is something that you decide right. You can decide right at the beginning of the contract with the contractor at negotiation stages, or you can write it somewhere in the contract that the employer will take part of the building for fit out for specific works. Beneficial occupation is that you can start using the building for any purpose because you're not covered by insurance, you're not covered by anything. This is a danger in going into beneficial occupation because it's not covered, it's not taking over. So beneficial occupation is not a taking over of the building itself.
Okay.
So normally it is something which is decided well before or in discussion between the employer and the contractor, and then it becomes a practice if you want, but not a contractual issue.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, everyone. As we conclude, I'm just going to ask the final word, starting from Hanna. I've got a few slides to terminate. So Hanna, just quickly, what's your final thought on, obviously, we've got all the architects watching you here as well. What's your word of wisdom to us all?
No, for myself, I enjoy contract administration, but it is something that can be tough because you have to manage these claims or these different parts if the contract is not administered well. As Vanita rightly pointed out in her triangle, if something you will have clauses that's being called in terms of cost problems, you'll have clauses being called in terms of time problem, etc. So if the contract is administered well, it indeed reduces these potential for disputes or problems arising. And especially now, as a subcontractor, which is a bit lower down in the food chain than the main contractor, I see that the risks is way higher for subcontractors in these very tough economic times. So maybe we'll have more and more pressure on the contract administrator or the FIDIC engineer, because everybody will be looking for their interests, will be wanting to protect their interests, maybe extension of time claims, maybe we'll have force majeure clauses coming in. So it will put more pressure on the contract administrator. So it's very good to have these kinds of CPDs, because it makes everybody aware of the rights, of the procedures, of the the mechanisms that is available in the contract. So yeah.
And Hanna, you just talked about it as well. The next CPD could be the implication of war in the construction industry. A war in Europe will affect us all. So something we need to talk about. Thank you, Hanna. I'll move on to Nirupa. Final word of wisdom from you, Nirupa. What do you want to say to us all watching you from a contract management point of view?
Yeah, I think much has been said by Vanita and all the panelists. My final word would be that what we want to do all is we want to reach an objective, and our objective is to complete the project as far as possible within cost and time. And that in this process of completing the work, I believe it has to be, it is very contractual, yes, but I think it has to be some sort of enjoyable process also. There is something that we have to keep in mind, that it's always a teamwork between the client, with the contractor, all the consultants. It's a teamwork with everyone having established responsibilities, of course, but it's a teamwork, and it's good to have this relationship, like a good working environment. And what we shouldn't forget also is that the contract administrator is a contract administrator, that he or she has to be fair between all the two parties, the client and the employer. It's not because the architect is, or the project manager is paid by the client that he has to take part of the client. It's a question of fairness, because he or she is managing the contract.
Okay, thank you very much, Nirupa. Dharam, a few words from you before I move on to Jay, Kim, and Vanita. So, few words on your experience. What's the best advice you would give to all of us when it comes to contract management?
When it comes to contracts, it's an agreement between two parties, with a third party, the consultant in between, the contract administrator, architect, engineer, and whatnot. But I think a very important aspect is the attitude of the parties concerned. You may have a lot of paperwork in place, contractually, legally, very good paperwork, but it depends on the attitude. Sometimes you can meet with client or the contractor with a negative attitude, approach to things. So then matters become quite complex and complicated to sort. But if you have the right attitude, the attitude to find a solution when the problem arises, then things would certainly become much more, and it would be easier to sort out than to hit with with an attitude which is really not positive.
Absolutely.
Not negative.
All right.
So
thank you. All right. Kim, before I move on to Jay and finish off with Vanita, Kim, few words from yourself to all the participants watching it right now.
I think for architects, and we have experienced it a lot of time as project managers and contract administrators, is that, like, architects, young architects should take care that any delay or is the information which is given late or whatever information not given in time to the contract will cause damage to the contract with respect to cost. And clients, this is where client doesn't like, and this is where they have to avoid and ensure that their drawings are properly ficelé, so that you don't get these sort of contractual issues because of late information. This is one key issue, that ensure that your drawings and your information given to the client are given diligently, so that you don't face problems with your employer eventually.
Okay, thank you. Jay, just quickly before we conclude with our speaker today, Jay, you talked about managing your emotions when it comes to contract management. Maybe you can share a few words on that.
I will share my heart first. I'll make confession.
Beware at your age to share your heart, my dear.
The confession is, To your question, Anil, whether I enjoy contract management, I replied no. But I think for me, it's a question of dealing with a project on a holistic point of view. By dealing with contract management, I'm aware of all the implications, and that prompts me to do my design work in a different way. As Kim was saying, I become more aware of the implications of details missing and things like that, you know. So even if I do not enjoy that part of, I prefer doing design rather than contract management. And most probably the audience tonight, to my colleagues architect, most of you probably, you enjoy design much better than doing contract management. But that is part and parcel of our responsibility, and it helps us to do our design better. And when I come to this side of the issue, then I understand. Yes, I don't have to go in. To burst my emotions, to keep calm, and we know that when your emotions get involved, you become a poor designer. So to stay a good designer, you have to master your emotions. That's it, Anil. Thank you.
Okay, something we can work on definitely in terms of emotion management going forward for the construction professional. Vanita, it's been another second part. We can't thank you enough. What's the word of wisdom would you give us all in terms of contracts management based on your 15 years of experience? I'm also putting a poll up as well, and I'm just gonna, it's been voted out. So Vanita, before we get to Vanita, maybe Hanna, what do you think the percentage would be on the question I've just shared? Based on the presentation today, would you like to know more about the contractual aspect of construction industry? What would be your statistic there?
I would say 50-50.
50-50, Nirupa?
I would say 90 for yes.
Okay, and Dharam, quickly.
I tend to agree with Nirupa's views. Yes,
Kim, what the percentage would be based? Do you think everybody would gonna go for it?
Yes, certainly.
Yeah, probably most of them.
And Mr. J?
Yeah, knowing my colleagues architect and knowing my own feelings, I would say 60.
That's not very optimistic, Mr. J, after 2 hours of presentation. So I'm going to now show the result. We've got a whopping 100% of people who want to go for learning more about construction industry. That's how impactful this webinar is. So Vanita, on this happy note, what do you want to say to us all?
Well, I think we dealt with a quite sensitive topic, which is contract administration, which tends to bring quite a lot of negative emotions into everyone. But I think the key word today for me would be collaboration, trust, and teamwork. That's what makes the contract work. That's what makes the project work. And my final note would be a huge thank you to all the architects, to the participants present here today, to the panelists who supported me very nicely in this presentation today. Thank you to PAC and MMA for having me once again among yourselves. And I wish everyone a very good evening and a good night.
And just quickly, if I can get, if I can have Barinder quickly. Barinder, if you can put your video on, I don't know if you're still here. If you can have your video on as well. Yeah, and maybe final word, what you've seen there, Barinder. Maybe a few words before we conclude.
Yeah, I think this has been a wonderful webinar. The way that Vanita presented the different aspects of the contract and the way the panelists have also complemented that. It's really been wonderful and very smooth flowing, like, you know, we have seen all the different aspects of the contract. And a certain thought came to my mind that, you know, when we're talking about the emotions that come in when we're doing contract administration and all that. So I was thinking, like, we might, you know, going through all the clauses and the responsibilities that each party has, you might, you know, tend to take a kind of a very strict kind of a, you know, approach, but that could lead to conflict and all that, you know. So the attitude, the collaboration, that kind of aspects have to be kept in mind. So I was thinking about how we would consider a contract manager. That's a certain qualities and certain kind of attitude that person has. And if you think of a leader, a contract manager is a leader in that whole team to get the work done. So leader has a different kind of qualities, So if we could have a mix of that, the leadership qualities and the contract manager qualities, so that would really bring out a good result at the end. Okay. Keeping the disputes out, yeah.
Thank you, Barinder. Yeah, thank you very much indeed, everyone. We've reached to 2 hours and 15 minutes. I'm sure we'll have to do more CPDs because we can talk all day long. Okay, so I know most of you are hungry and we've escaped. I'm between you and your dinner, so I'm in a very dangerous place right now. But I'd like to thank everybody. Thank you very much indeed. We've reached our 85th webinar today. It's been an amazing journey. Vanita has already done 2 of them, and I thank Jay, Kim, Dharam, Nirupa, and Hanna for giving back, and also Barinder and the MA and PSC. Please email me at anil@cpdtalk.com with your names and also your feedback, and we'll take all this into consideration. So thank you very much indeed. Have a great evening, and can we have a big wave from the panelists and the speakers? Everybody, a big wave. Thank you very much indeed, and take care.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.